So we're just heading into kind of the fall harvest season here on the homestead, and we often get asked questions like, what are you growing? What are you harvesting? What do your days and time look like? And a lot of times we get met with like blank stares when we try and explain what our world actually looks like, or somebody will ask us to do something on the weekend and we're like, sorry, we can't, we're harvesting all day every day, or things like that. And so we're just going to break that down, talk openly about what our time looks like, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly of the fall harvest season on the homestead.
So this is new for us. We didn't grow up in this homesteading world. We were born and raised in the suburbs, and until we moved on our homestead 2 years ago, really all of this was new. So before this, we did live on a third of an acre in the suburbs, and we did a lot there. We had backyard chickens, we kept bees, we had large gardens, but our goals in doing all of that were very different, right? It was for learning, it was for fun, it was for experimenting. But when we moved on our homestead, our goals really shifted to becoming more about how can we feed our family as much as possible for the full year from the food that we grow or that we're able to source locally from other farmers. And so that has just led to a really huge shift in our thinking and in what our days have looked like because of the scale and the amount that requires.
Yeah, it's just been a big shift. Like, we could have gone out and harvested all the potatoes that we had grown in like, one 20-foot row or something like that in an hour or 2 hours before. Mm-hmm. But now we've got like several 100 feet of potatoes planted, and it takes days and maybe even a full week of harvesting potatoes.
That's
and
a lot.
Trying to kind of budget that in alongside. We're still very much in like the regular growing season. Like our cows are still out on pasture, so we're needing to move fence every week. And then when you throw in all the harvesting, all the preservation, all the kind of just, I don't know, clearing stuff out from last year and getting ready for kind of new, what we're stocking up for this winter. There's just a lot there.
So I think one of the big things that I've been learning from these last couple of years of kind of living this homesteading lifestyle where our focus is really trying to feed our family for the full year as much as possible is just really what it means, what it looks like to live in this very seasonal way, because we just have to. Right? Like this fall season, regardless of how tired I am, regardless of whether or not I feel like it, it's kind of a boots on the ground, everyone's all in approach. And like, we are just like, there's a lot to be done and we have to do it. Like it's all out there for us and it needs to happen. Like if it doesn't happen, we miss out on all of the work that we have put in up until now, and this is where we really get an opportunity to kind of enjoy the fruits of our labor, but that means a lot of hard work to get there. And so I always think like once December and January and February come, I do really look forward to those months of more rest and of just really getting to kind of rest, sit back, and enjoy the fruits of our labor, because this time now in August, September, October, even November specifically are just really full seasons, right? Everything that we planted needs harvested. Animals still need a ton of care and moving fencing and getting ready for winter and winterizing and all of those things.
Yeah, and it's really hard, like in the season, balancing all the just regular life things outside of what we're growing and harvesting and things like that. Like I know schooling right now, like we homeschool our kids, and that's just part of the reality. So. Like it's really hard to make that a priority right now. But the other side of it is like it's a sweet part of homeschooling that like really the classroom right now is outside in in the fields, harvesting and bringing in potatoes and corn and beans and squash and whatever else
our daughter is super into she's listening on audiobook to all the like old school American Girl books. So the kind of characters that I grew up with when I was a kid. But anyway, she loves listening to them on audiobook. And one of the ones she was listening to recently, Kirsten, who grew up in like the 1850s, and they just talked about what school was like then and how kids didn't go to school in the spring or in the fall because that was planting and harvesting season, and that was all families were all in kind of at work during those seasons, and then they went to school during the winter and the summer seasons, which were slower seasons, on their homesteads and on their farms. And so I just, as I was, I was overhearing her listening to that, I was like, yes, like that makes sense. Because I feel like that's what our life is like. That like right now, like, we are trying to squeeze things in the margin, which I feel like is how I'm trying to do everything, is squeeze things in the margin, as our days are just really full. So it's like, get up. And I mean, even this morning at like 5 a.m. when it was still dark outside, I was chopping potatoes to roast them, and then after milking our cow, taking them out of the oven and making tomato sauce so that I could can that, and then meanwhile chopping up a ton of apples for making applesauce. And that's just kind of a daily rhythm for us right now, is kind of, since we're still in a lot of those end of the summer foods that are just finishing up, like the tomatoes and apples are just starting, and then really soon here we're going to kind of need to start turning towards harvesting all of our root vegetables for storage. So like our carrots and our beets and our lots and lots of pounds, many thousands of pounds of potatoes that we planted, and all of that.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that like we're just getting into harvesting season here. Like we haven't fully even started it yet. We have on some smaller scales, but we still have a lot of crops out in the field that need to get brought in, mainly potatoes, which is like a huge effort. I just remember last year getting to the end of potato harvest, and like there's not been very many times in my life where my body physically was just like, yeah, I'm totally done, like, just right, everything's ready to give out. But that like potato harvesting with just a pitchfork and some shovels was backbreaking work.
A lot of work.
And yeah, it felt like this mad dash to get it all in before the...
Yeah, it was Halloween, October 31st last year, that we finally finished harvesting our potatoes, and we were like racing to get it done so we could take our kids trick-or-treating. Yeah, we were exhausted.
Yeah, it was a push, but it's so worth it too. And yeah, so it reminds me of the story I just read in a book recently of like, it was talking about this farmer's kind of experience of his rural community around him was transitioning from kind of these diversified family farms to more like conventional monocrop type farms. And then, a supermarket went into the local town, and one day so-and-so from down the street comes over and says like, oh, you wouldn't believe I bought like, however many pounds of potatoes for practically nothing at the supermarket the other day. And, this dad farmer's kind of sitting there like inwardly stewing and over this, because he's out there harvesting potatoes all day and bringing them in. And the next day he goes out to harvest potatoes, comes back in and says, that's it, we're buying potatoes from the supermarket from here on out. And they never planted another potato in their fields again, and just gave up on it. And like, I don't know, I think that is sort of like the temptation or the reality of it. Like it's really hard work. Like fall on the homestead is hard work. You are tired. You are going at it full time, like sun up to sundown. There's no really like hardly any margin time in our world during this. It is like, people ask us to do something and we just have to say no, or we just have to like, not put as many things on our plate during the season. At the same rate though, like it's such sweet time together as a family, and like we're all in this together. We all understand that like this is our livelihood at stake. This is why we do this whole thing, because we're wanting to live off the land. We're wanting to grow food and kind of know how it's grown and know that it's like the most nutrient rich foods possible, and frankly just not the food that you would get from the supermarket that's kind of subpar and shipped in from halfway around the world. And so
yeah, I mean, studies have even shown, because the quality of the soil matters, like foods grown in kind of these conventional large scale systems with really not diverse soil, like those vegetables and those things that they're growing just aren't going to have the same nutrients as things grown kind of in the soil where where you're always kind of putting life back into it over and over and over again.
Yeah. And so like yes, it's been hard, but like it's awesome. It's worth it. Mm-hmm. Like if you're in this position, if you have a garden or a homestead and you're like, oh man, the fall it's approaching. It's so hard. Like it's totally worth it. And that's like come January and February and March, like that's when we get to look back and say like, we're enjoying the bounty of everything, of all the things we canned and the squash on our shelves and the potatoes and bins in the basement, and just like we have this whole supermarket right there in our basement because we pushed so hard in the fall to have all that there and ready and available.
Yeah. So then I think the other question we're asked a lot is, so what are you even growing? Like, what does this look like? And this is where also things have really shifted from when we had kind of just our suburban home garden, where really by this kind of September time, we were really wrapping things up, right? We were growing our tomatoes and our zucchinis and like just kind of normal summer vegetables. But since we have shifted into this mindset of how can we feed our family year round, it's a lot more, we're growing a lot more of these more kind of later season harvest storage crops. So like a ton of potatoes, ton of root vegetables that store well, like carrots, beets, turnips. And then our Three Sisters garden, we do a huge rows of Three Sisters garden. So corn, beans, and squash, and beans are kind of a labor of love in themselves. And, and so it's a lot of those sorts of things along with cabbage. And then actually one of our favorite things to grow that's really keeping us busy right now are ground cherries. And so a lot of people have never heard of ground cherries, but they're these really delicious little fruit. They almost taste like a kind of a mixture between a tomato and then like something sweet and tropical, like a pineapple or a mango. And they have this little cover to them, and they're just like they sound, ground cherries. So they have these big viney plants that really spread out. So like last year, it was our first year growing them. We planted them right in the middle of our garden, and they like took over everything. So we learned this year to plant them on the end by themselves. But anyways, yeah, they just sprawl out, and then just like they sound, ground cherries, you know that they're ripe for harvest actually when they fall and are on the ground. So it's like a crazy good workout harvesting these things, right? Because you're like doing acrobatics down, trying to
do your ninja moves, like sneaking in under the plant
crawling
and grabbing things
to grab these ground cherries. But they grow by the bucket full. Like literally, we get buckets and buckets of ground cherries. But they're awesome because you can preserve them. We can make jams and sauces out of them. You can freeze them. We've added them with our tomatoes to make this really delicious tomato sauce where they add just this really nice sweetness. Or of course you can just eat them straight up, which is what our kids like to do if there are any hanging around. So.
Yeah, they're perfect for kids because harvesting them is a great activity for kids because they're like on the ground and they can just go and hunt for them under the plants. And then like we just give them a bucket and they take off the little wrapper on them and get them ready for whatever eating or making into a jam or a sauce or whatever, and then they'll just sit down and eat like half the bucket of them because they're so good.
Because they're so good.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit. Let's see what else. Cabbage. Oh, we do a lot of Brussels sprouts because those store pretty well. Cabbage will store really well. So it's just a lot of things that I actually like leave out in the garden till the last possible minute and harvest so that we can store them as long as possible later. So now we're kind of just getting to that point where like everything is ready and is going to need harvested. And so that's where it's kind of a every day there's something we're going after, whether it's carrots and storing them properly so that they will last, or potatoes are a big one. They take a long time. Last year we grew a couple 1,000 pounds of potatoes. So that's a big one.
So that's a little window into our world and life on the homestead during harvest season, and it's long, hard days, right, as we explained, but like we often ask ourselves even like what would we be doing otherwise if we weren't doing this? And I don't know, I think this is the thing that we ultimately want to be doing with our time, right? We're out there as a family together harvesting, we're making memories, we're connected to our food and growing our own food, and we've got, at the end of it all, we've got a whole stockpile of food to get us through the winter. And so if you're there, if you're in this too, gardening, homesteading, whatever, like, it's totally worth it. You got this.
Yeah, I feel like these are the soundtracks that we have to like keep playing in our head over and over again.
Yeah.
Like, you can do this. Like, keep going, push through.
It's so worth it. So yeah, so thanks so much for stopping by the farmstead today, and we'll see you next time.